The doorbell rang unexpectedly, causing Emily to jump. She stood frozen, holding the untouched plate in her hands. "Caleb, stay here. I'll get it," Emily said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She approached slowly, peered through the peephole, and felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Standing outside was Margaret, her mother-in-law, whom she hadn't seen in 6 months. In her arms, Margaret carried large bags filled with gifts, and a bright smile lit up her face. "Oh, he has no idea," Emily thought. Her fingers trembled as she turned the key in the lock. The door swung open, and there, in the doorway, stood an elegant woman wearing a coat. "Honey, my dear!" the mother-in-law exclaimed, stepping forward to hug her. But suddenly she paused. Her eyes swept the living room, noticing the changes. The men's shoes that used to sit neatly by the shelf were gone. The favorite jacket of her son, once hanging by the coat rack, had disappeared. Margaret slowly turned her gaze back to her daughter-in-law, and the smile began to fade from her face. Emily saw the expression on Margaret's face: confusion, concern, realization. The bags in Margaret's hands trembled slightly. "Where's Jason?" she asked softly. It was clear from her eyes that she had already guessed the answer. "Come in, Margaret, please," Emily said, stepping aside to let her mother-in-law into the apartment. "Let me help you with your bags." "Grandma's here," came a joyful cry as Caleb ran out of the playroom. Behind him followed little Sophie, just 5 years old. "My sweethearts." Margaret dropped the bags and opened her arms wide. The grandchildren rushed toward her, hugging her tightly from both sides. Emily stood there watching the scene, feeling a lump forming in her throat. She remembered how, not long ago, family gatherings like this were filled with genuine happiness. Now every glance felt like an unspoken question. "Grandma, are you staying for a long time?" Caleb asked, clinging to her neck. "And what did you bring us?" Sophie chimed in, peeking curiously at the bags. Margaret gently patted their heads, but her eyes kept drifting back to Emily, as if searching for answers to questions she hadn't dared to ask. "Kids," Emily said gently, "let Grandma take off her coat and go play in your room." A heavy silence settled over the living room. The children became absorbed in their new gifts, while the two women sat facing each other, not knowing how to start the conversation. "I've been trying to call Jason for weeks," Margaret finally said. "His phone was always out of service. I decided to come myself." She remained silent, her eyes locked on her daughter-in-law. Emily nervously wrung her fingers. "Mom, look at the doll Grandma gave me," Sophie cried out, running up with her new toy. "Very pretty, sweetheart," Emily said, patting her daughter's head. "Caleb, go play with your sister in the room, okay? We need to talk with Grandma." Reluctantly, the children left the room, and once again silence fell. Outside, dusk was slowly descending, painting everything in muted grays. "How long?" Margaret asked softly. "What? How long has he been gone?" Emily took a deep breath. 3 months. He left. With another woman. Margaret closed her eyes. Her hands, resting on her knees, trembled slightly. "Who is she?" "A new co-worker. She's about 12 years younger than him. I don't know many details. He just packed his things and left." "Why didn't you call me?" her mother-in-law asked, her voice wounded. "I didn't know how," Emily admitted honestly. "You were always so proud of him," Margaret said slowly. "He's my son, but that doesn't mean I approve of everything he does." Silence settled between them again. Emily's voice faltered slightly. "Caleb understands everything. He tries to stay strong, but sometimes I hear him crying at night." "And Sophie?" Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "She keeps asking when Daddy's coming back home." Margaret stood and walked over to the window. Her silhouette was clearly outlined against the fading afternoon light. "He rarely sees them anymore. Every time he finds an excuse to postpone the meeting." "And how are they coping financially?" Margaret turned to her daughter-in-law. "I'm back at work. I'm putting in extra hours at the school. On weekends, I tutor privately," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Jason sends money, but it's hardly enough for everything we need." The mother-in-law sank back into the chair, collapsing heavily onto the cushions. "Why did he do this?" she murmured, more to herself than to Emily. "His father and I raised him differently." "Nana," Sophie's voice interrupted from across the room. "When is Daddy coming? Are you going to call him? Will you tell him you came?" The two women exchanged glances. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart," Margaret said, pulling Sophie into a hug. "Daddy is busy with work, but I promise, I'll speak to him." Emily turned away, hiding the tears that threatened to spill. How painful it was, answering those innocent questions every single day, seeing the hope shining in her daughter's eyes. "And can I draw a picture for Daddy?" Sophie asked excitedly. "Will you give it to him?" "Of course, honey. Go ahead and draw." When the little girl ran off, Margaret let out a deep sigh. "Forgive me," she said. "For what?" "For my son. For not raising him better. For not calling him out on his mistakes sooner." "It's not your fault," Emily said, shaking her head. "You've been a wonderful mother and an amazing mother-in-law." Her voice trembled and silence fell between them. Memories suddenly flooded Emily's mind. Margaret teaching her how to cook Jason's favorite meals, helping with the kids when they were small, offering advice during the hard times. "You know," Emily said slowly, "I had a feeling something was wrong. A mother's heart senses these things. But I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe he was just tired, stressed from work." The room was quiet except for the steady ticking of the wall clock and the distant chatter of the children. "What are you going to do now?" Margaret asked. Emily shrugged. "Keep going. For the kids. I don't have another choice." "There's always a choice," Margaret said firmly, "and I won't let you go through this alone." She stood and began pacing the living room. "Tomorrow I'll call Jason. I'll make him answer. And then we'll see how to organize your life. Maybe you could move closer to us, your father-in-law and me. I know the kids are in school and preschool here, but we'll figure it out. The most important thing is that you're not alone." At that moment, a scream and the sound of crying came from the children's room. Both women jumped up and rushed toward the noise. Sophie had tried to reach for the paints on the top shelf and had knocked over a box of toys. Caleb stood beside her, looking guilty. "I wanted to help, but I couldn't catch it in time," he explained. Margaret scooped the crying girl into her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll clean everything up, and it'll all be fine." Emily began picking up the scattered toys while Margaret gently rocked Sophie. Once the children were asleep in their beds, Emily and Margaret sat down in the kitchen, sipping tea. "Do you remember how we first met?" Margaret asked suddenly. Emily smiled a little. "Of course. I was so nervous before our first meeting. I broke your favorite teacup. And I thought to myself, what a lively, genuine girl. She's not pretending to be anything she's not." Margaret paused, lost in thought. "You know, I knew from the beginning you were the one who would make my son happy." "Well, it seems you were wrong," Emily said bitterly. "No," Margaret answered firmly. "I wasn't wrong. You gave him everything, love, a family, children. What he failed to value, he lost. That was his choice, and his mistake." The noise of a passing car floated through the window. For a brief moment, the headlights lit up the kitchen, making both women squint. "Sometimes," Emily said in a low voice, "I wonder if I did something wrong. Maybe I should have paid more attention to him instead of focusing so much on the kids and work." "Enough," Margaret cut in. "This is not your fault. You were a wonderful wife, and you are still an amazing mother." The next morning began with the smell of fresh pancakes. Margaret had gotten up earlier than everyone else and decided to lift the family's spirits with breakfast. The first to appear in the kitchen was Caleb, drawn by the delicious aroma. "Nana, did you stay up all night?" "Of course not," she smiled, flipping another pancake. "I just woke up early. At my age, you don't need much sleep to dream." "And Daddy loved your pancakes," the boy said suddenly. Silence fell over the kitchen. Margaret stopped, spatula in hand, and then turned slowly to face him. "You know, Caleb, no matter what happens, you can always count on us, your grandma and grandpa." "Of course, Nana, I know," Caleb replied softly. "Nana, are you really going to talk to Daddy?" "Of course I will," Margaret said firmly, though her heart twisted painfully at the thought of the conversation ahead. Emily shuffled into the kitchen, still looking sleepy. "Good morning, Margaret. Why are you up so early?" Sit down," Margaret said, waving her hand. "You should wake Sophie now, or she'll be late for preschool." As Emily woke her daughter, Margaret set the table. Watching the family gather for breakfast, she thought about how much her son had thrown away by chasing fleeting dreams instead of holding on to the warm, simple happiness he already had. After breakfast, the usual morning routine began. Emily braided Sophie's hair, Caleb checked his backpack, and Margaret prepared snacks for the kids. Maybe I should walk them to school today, Margaret suggested. That way you can get ready for work calmly. Thank you, but Emily hesitated. I'm afraid the teachers might have questions. I understand, Margaret nodded. Then I'll stay home, tidy up, and we'll prepare something nice together this afternoon. There was a small commotion by the door as the children put on their shoes. Mom, I'm ready, Caleb shouted. When the door closed behind Emily and the kids, Margaret sat heavily in a chair, pulled out her phone, and searched for her son's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she say? How could she explain the pain she had seen in her grandchildren's eyes? How could she reach his conscience? Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button. The dial tone sounded. Once, twice, 3 times. Hi, Mom. Jason's voice came through, surprised. Is something wrong? I'm with your family, Jason. Your real family. There was silence on the other end. Mom, I can't talk right now. I'm at work. If you can listen, then listen, she cut him off. And you will listen, son. Jason's voice sharpened with irritation. Let's not start this. No, son, we will start. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That you could erase 15 years of marriage and abandon your children? I didn't abandon the kids. Sending money, calling it support. Margaret felt the anger rise inside her. Do you think the children care only about money? Do you even know that your son cries himself to sleep? That your daughter asks about you every single day? Mom, it's complicated, Jason said. What's complicated? Explain it to me. What could be so difficult about loving your own children? I love them, Jason raised his voice. But I also have the right to pursue my happiness. Happiness? She scoffed bitterly. And what is happiness, Jason? Betraying those who believed in you? Destroying your family? That's your idea of happiness. You don't understand. No, you're the one who doesn't understand. Her voice cracked with emotion. I raised you to be better. I taught you to be responsible for your actions, and you destroyed everything. The line fell silent. Only Jason's heavy breathing could be heard. Mom, I have to go. I have a meeting. You always run away from difficult conversations, Margaret said, shaking her head. You're not the son I once knew. After hanging up, Margaret stood by the window for a long time, staring out blankly. Then slowly she began cleaning the apartment methodically. As she wiped the shelves, she noticed the family photo album. She opened it and froze. On the first page was a picture of Jason and Emily's wedding. So happy, so young. She turned the page. Caleb's birth. Jason holding a tiny bundle in his arms, eyes shining with pride. Another page. Sophie's first steps, family vacations, birthdays. Tears fell onto the glossy pages. Margaret carefully wiped them away with a tissue. The day passed slowly. She completed all the household chores, prepared dinner, and even managed a trip to the grocery store. At 3 o'clock, Emily picked up Sophie from preschool after finishing her classes. Caleb returned home on his own. He was now old enough to walk back without help. Nana, what about dinner? Her grandson asked, sniffing the air from the doorway. Margaret hugged him tightly. This is your home, sweetheart. Here, you're loved more than anything else in the world. That evening, after the children were asleep, Margaret told Emily about her conversation with Jason. I didn't want to interfere, Emily whispered. It's your decision. No, dear. Margaret shook her head. When you have children, you no longer have that luxury. Your duty is to put them first. Emily suddenly burst into tears. Do you know what's most terrible? She cried. I still love him. Margaret simply pulled her into a silent embrace, letting her cry it out. The next morning, Jason called. Mom, his voice sounded guilty. I've been thinking about what you said. And? Margaret asked curtly. Maybe I should see the kids. Are you ready to look them in the eyes? Ready to answer their questions? Jason fell silent. I miss them, he said finally, his voice strangely fragile. Then why aren't you here? Why are you still hiding behind excuses? It's hard to explain. Try, she said firmly. I have time. I'm scared, Jason confessed after a long pause. Scared of disappointing them. Scared of the questions. Scared I won't know what to say. Then explain it to me first, Margaret said gently. What happened, son? When did everything start falling apart? I don't know. His voice sounded lost. At some point I felt like life was slipping away, like I was stuck in a rut. And you thought a new relationship would fix everything? Yes, I guess I did. Jason, you made a huge mistake. Mistakes can be fixed, Margaret said carefully, if you truly want to. And Emily? How is she? How do you think? She replied, her voice firm. She's working 2 jobs to keep the children afloat. She's doing everything she can to stay strong. And you? Sending money. Do you think that's enough? She cut him off before he could answer. Money was never the important thing. Emily never cared about material stuff. I know, Jason said quietly. She's special. Then why did you destroy everything? Another long silence. Only his heavy breathing echoed through the phone. I'll come by tonight, if that's okay, he said at last. Ask yourself if this is still your home, Margaret answered. I'll be there, but not for you, for the kids. They need support. Thank you, Jason exhaled. I'll try to make it right. Try, son. Margaret ended the call and sat for a long time, thinking about how to break the news to Emily. To her surprise, Emily took it calmly. Let him come, she said. The children need their father. She didn't finish the thought. Are you sure? Margaret asked gently. No, Emily admitted honestly. But do I have a choice? Caleb and Sophie miss him terribly. You always have a choice, Margaret said softly, and also the right to protect yourself. Emily remained silent. Sometimes, she whispered, maybe it's better this way. At least now there are no illusions. The day dragged on slowly. Margaret noticed how tense Emily was, despite her attempts to hide it. The children sensed the tension too, but attributed it to their grandmother's visit. Mom, why are you acting weird? Sophie asked during lunch. It's okay, sweetie, Emily smiled. I'm just a little tired. Caleb watched his mother and grandmother carefully. At 11 years old, he already understood more than he let on. Later, when they were alone, he whispered to Margaret, Is something wrong? You'll know tonight, darling, she said, hugging him. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Emily flinched and turned pale. I'll get it, Margaret said. At the door stood Jason, thin and looking lost, holding bags with presents. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Margaret silently stepped aside to let him in. Emily appeared in the hallway. Hello, she said, her voice restrained. Emily, Jason began, but he was interrupted by a joyful cry. Daddy! Sophie ran out of the children's room and threw herself into his arms. Jason scooped her up and hugged her tightly. His eyes shimmered with tears. My little girl, Jason whispered, burying his face into her hair. Caleb appeared behind them, standing at the threshold, hesitant to approach. His face reflected a complicated mix of emotions: happiness, suspicion, resentment. Son, Jason said, reaching out his hand. Caleb slowly moved forward. Jason gently set Sophie down and tried to embrace his son, but Caleb pulled away. Where were you? The boy asked, looking him straight in the eyes. Why did it take you so long to come back? A heavy silence fell over the hallway. Sophie looked confusedly between her brother and her father. I was caught up with work, Jason murmured. You're lying, Caleb said in a low voice. I know everything. You left with another woman. Emily turned even paler. Margaret placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Jason knelt down in front of his son. You're right. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. We've had some hard times, Caleb continued. Sophie started crying. Mom thinks I don't notice she cries at night, but I see. Daddy, are you going to stay forever now? Sophie asked, clinging to her father's hand. Jason looked up helplessly at Emily. She stood rigid like a stretched wire, although her fingers nervously played with the hem of her sweater. Let's move to the living room, Margaret suggested softly. We all need to talk. They settled in different spots. Jason sat in an armchair with Sophie on his lap. Caleb sat beside his mother on the couch, and Margaret took a seat near the window. "I brought gifts for you," Jason began awkwardly. "We don't want gifts," Caleb interrupted. "We want a dad, a real one." "I am real, son." "No." Caleb suddenly stood up. "Real dads don't abandon their kids. They don't leave with other women." He didn't finish the sentence. Tears filled his eyes as he ran from the room. Emily moved to follow him, but Margaret stopped her with a gentle motion. "I'll go." Sophie, still curled up on Jason's lap, suddenly asked, "Daddy, is that lady nice?" Emily stood up abruptly. "Sweetheart, come on, it's bedtime." "But Mommy." "No buts, it's late." Jason carefully set Sophie down. "Listen, sweetheart, I'll be back soon." Emily led Sophie away. When she returned, she found Jason sitting with his head in his hands. "What have I done?" he muttered. The silence in the room was broken only by the muffled sobs of Caleb coming from the bedroom, where Margaret was comforting him. Emily sat down across from her ex-husband. "Why did you come?" "I miss the kids." "Only them," Jason answered bitterly. He looked up at her. "Emily, I know I hurt all of you." "Oh, really?" "You think?" She laughed bitterly. 3 months, Jason. 3 months with barely a call. Promises, nothing more. "I was confused," he said quietly. "I thought I had found love." "And what about before?" Emily shot back. "Were the 15 years not love?" "They were," Jason admitted. "It was real love, but I didn't appreciate it." "And now?" she asked. "What's changed?" "We've all changed," he replied, pacing the living room. "You know, Mom was right. I'm not the man I used to be. I betrayed everything I believed in. I betrayed you, our kids." "And now you want to come back?" Emily said, her voice sharp. He stopped in front of her. "I want to try to fix it." "And your new love?" she asked, pain evident in her voice. "It was a mistake, Emily. A terrible mistake." Margaret returned to the room. "Caleb doesn't want to come out," she said. "He said he's tired and wants to sleep." Jason made a move toward the bedroom, but his mother stopped him. "Not now. Give him time." "How much time?" he asked bitterly. "How long does it take to forgive a betrayal?" "Are you willing to wait?" Emily asked in a low voice. "To prove every single day that you can be trusted again?" "I am," Jason said firmly, "if you'll let me try." Margaret sat silently, realizing that the fate of their family was being decided at that very moment. "You know," Emily said slowly, "I've thought a lot over these months. About us, about the kids, about what went wrong." "And," Jason asked, hope flickering in his voice, "love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, a decision to stay together every day, no matter what happens." "Could you make that choice again?" Jason asked, his voice trembling. Emily shook her head. "I don't know. I really don't know. There's too much pain, too many wounds." "I understand," he whispered, "but I'll try." "The kids are the most important," Margaret intervened. "Whatever decision you two make, they must come first." "I know, Mom," Jason nodded. "Now you know," Emily said, bitterness still tinging her voice. "Before, you only thought about yourself, about your desires and problems." Jason ran a hand over his face. "God, how selfish I was." "You were," Emily agreed. "But what matters now is who you choose to become." From the children's room came the sound of Olivia crying. "I'll check on them," Emily said, standing. "Can I go?" Jason asked softly. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He moved carefully toward the bedroom. Margaret sat down next to Emily. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," Emily confessed. "Anger, resentment, pain, and strangely, silence." "And love too," Margaret added. "Yes," Emily whispered, "and I hate myself for it." From the bedroom, Jason's low voice could be heard, telling Sophie a story, then silence. After a while, Jason returned. "She's asleep. Caleb too." "It's late. You should go," Emily said. "Of course," or he hesitated. "Can I come back tomorrow to see the kids?" "We'll see," Emily answered softly. When the door closed behind Jason, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked. "Like everything inside me is in turmoil," Emily admitted. I imagined this meeting so many times. And now? And now? Now I don't know what to do. Forgive, forget, start over, or let go forever. What does your heart say? Margaret asked gently. It's divided, Emily confessed, between what's right and what I want. The next morning, Margaret was getting ready to leave. I have to go home. Your grandfather and I have things to take care of. You and the kids need to figure this out yourselves. Stay a little longer, Emily asked. I need your support. Her mother-in-law hugged her tightly. You're stronger than you think, and you need to make your decision. What if I make the wrong one? In life, there are no right or wrong decisions, Margaret said wisely. Only those whose consequences we're willing to accept. Will you come back soon? Sophie asked, hugging her grandmother tightly. Of course, sweetheart. And you can come visit us too. Caleb, a little more distant, watched quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. Nana, Dad really has changed, Caleb said. Margaret knelt down in front of her grandson. Sweetheart, people can change if they truly want to, but it takes time and forgiveness. And what if I can't forgive? That's okay, she said, gently caressing his head. What matters is that you listen to your heart. Shortly before leaving, Margaret pulled Emily aside. Do you remember what I told you the very first day? To keep it in your heart? Yes, Emily replied. Well, whatever decision you make, I'll be completely on your side. You're part of our family, and that will never change. Emily hugged her mother-in-law tightly. Thank you for everything. Call me whenever you need, Margaret said. And remember, sometimes we have to lose something to understand its true worth. That evening, Jason returned, this time without any presents. Just a stuffed bunny, Sophie's favorite, which had been left behind at his apartment. Caleb locked himself in his room again, but Sophie ran joyfully down the hallway. Let's go for a walk, Jason suggested. All of us together. Emily hesitated. I don't know. Please, Mom, Sophie begged. All right, Emily agreed. Caleb, she called out. Want to come with us? A faint sound behind the door was heard. At the park, everything seemed lighter. Sophie ran toward the swings while Caleb walked behind with his hands in his pockets. And how's work? Emily asked, breaking the awkward silence. Good, Jason answered quietly. She stopped. He did too. I haven't stopped thinking about us, about what we were and what we could have been. She also paused, watching Sophie on the swing. You know what's the hardest part? She said softly. Answering the kids' questions about you every night, making up excuses for your absence, seeing the disappointment in their eyes. Jason clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. I'm going to fix it, he said. I swear. Don't swear, Emily replied calmly. Prove it. Caleb, who had been walking behind, suddenly came closer. Dad, do you remember when we used to fly kites here? Of course I remember, son, Jason's voice shook. You were so happy. Can we do it again sometime? Of course, Jason said, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Whenever you want. This time, Caleb didn't pull away. Days passed. Jason came every evening, spending time with the children, helping Caleb with his homework, reading stories to Sophie. Emily watched these changes with cautious hope. Little by little, she saw Caleb lower his guard and Sophie smile the way she used to. One night as the kids slept, Jason stopped at the entrance of the living room. Emily, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said, but I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. She stayed silent, feeling her heart pounding. Time passed. A month. Sophie was already used to seeing her father arrive daily. Caleb remained reserved but no longer locked himself away when Jason came. Emily could see how much Jason had changed. His former arrogance had been replaced with a deep seriousness. Now he listened more than he spoke. He cared more for others than for himself. One day he brought an old photo album he had kept since moving out. I found this. It was at my place, but it belongs here. At home. The word home echoed deeply in Emily's heart. One evening, Caleb asked his father to stay and help him with a math problem. They spent hours poring over the book. Passing by Caleb's room, Emily overheard the conversation. Dad, is it true you won't leave us again? There was a pause. Never, son. Not unless you and your mom really want me to. And that other woman? She was a mistake, Caleb. A terrible mistake that almost made me lose the most precious thing I have. You. One day, Margaret called. How's everything going, dear? Little by little, Emily answered. Jason is doing everything he can. And your heart? What does it tell you? Emily was silent for a moment. It tells me that some people deserve a second chance, that true repentance comes from the heart when it's ready. I know, Margaret said softly. Now I understand too. Gradually, life found a new rhythm. Something had changed. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was something deeper, a new understanding, a more conscious relationship. Jason had learned to notice the little things, the tiredness in Emily's eyes, the worry in Caleb's voice, the silent sadness in Sophie. He learned not just to be present, but to truly be there for them. One night, as Sophie yawned, she mumbled sleepily, Daddy, I'm so happy you came back. One weekend, the whole family visited Margaret's home. The old house welcomed them with warmth and the smell of fresh baked goods. My darlings, the grandmother exclaimed joyfully as she hugged them. The grandfather, quiet and solemn, hugged his grandchildren tightly and later whispered to his son, Take care of them, Jason. You might not get another chance. I know, Dad, Jason replied. Now I really know. Emily, watching the scene, felt warmth spreading through her chest. That night, after the children had gone to sleep in the upstairs bedroom, the adults sat out on the porch talking about simple things. Work, school, future plans. Do you remember how you first came here? Margaret said suddenly. You were so shy, Emily. I remember, Emily smiled. I was scared I wouldn't fit in. But you became part of us, her mother-in-law said warmly. Part of our family. Forever. Jason looked at his wife, and there was so much tenderness in his eyes that Emily could barely breathe. On the way home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting on her brother's shoulder. Caleb was also starting to drift off. Our little travelers are tired, Emily said softly. Jason glanced at her quickly. Emily, can I stay tonight? Just to be close? She stayed silent for a moment, looking at the road ahead. Okay, she finally replied. But I know, he said, interrupting her gently. I know it's just one step at a time. Day after day, Emily repeated those words to herself. At night, after putting the children to bed, they would sit together in the kitchen. There was still a distance between them, but it no longer felt so insurmountable. You know, Jason said quietly, every day I thank God for this chance, the chance to make things right. And I'm grateful to see our children smile again, Emily replied, to see hope back in their eyes. You're amazing, he said, softly touching her hand. Forgiving isn't forgetting, she said, shaking her head. It's choosing to believe again, in people, in love, in family. Time passed, and little by little, the old wounds began to heal, making room for new experiences and a deeper understanding. Jason hadn't just returned. He had truly changed, becoming more sensitive, more attentive. Emily had changed too, growing stronger, more self-confident. She learned to value not only her family, but also herself. Caleb no longer locked himself away when his father came home. Now they did homework together, played, and talked deeply. Sophie simply radiated happiness at seeing the family whole again. One afternoon, while the kids napped, Jason and Emily sat together in the living room. Outside, rain fell heavily, tapping softly against the window. Remember, Jason said gently, how we met on a rainy night like this? I remember, Emily smiled. You gave me your umbrella and ended up soaked, and you never regretted it. He stayed silent for a moment. Until the day I made the biggest mistake of my life. The past can't be changed, she said softly. That weekend, the whole family went to the park. Jason really did bring the kite, as he had promised Caleb. They flew it together, laughter and joyful shouts echoing across the park. Sophie jumped around, trying to catch the tail of the kite, while Emily watched them, thinking how incredible life could be, how broken pieces of happiness could be reassembled into something new, maybe even stronger. What are you thinking about? Jason asked, walking toward her. About us, she answered simply. About how everything is possible if we just believe. That same night, Emily called Margaret. I don't know. It feels like things are getting better. I always believed in you, dear, her mother-in-law said tenderly. In your love, in your wisdom. It's because of you, Emily said quietly. You never let us fall. You supported us at our lowest. No, dear, it was you, your hearts that found their way back to each other. Emily smiled as she looked out the window and saw Jason pushing Sophie on the swing. The months turned into a new story for their family, a story filled with forgiveness, repentance, and a love that was now deeper and more mature. Jason proved every day, through actions rather than words, that he had truly changed. Emily learned to trust again. The children blossomed, feeling their world was whole once more. Margaret loved them all just as they were, and rejoiced seeing her family stronger than ever. One morning during breakfast, Caleb suddenly said, "You know, now I understand." "Understand what?" Jason asked. "What it means to love, to know someone, to forgive, to give a second chance." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She hugged her son tightly. "You're wiser than all of us, little one." "I'm not little," Caleb muttered as always, but he didn't pull away from his father's embrace. 6 months had passed since Margaret first crossed the threshold of that transformed home. 6 months of hard work, on themselves, on their relationship, on rebuilding trust. But it had all been worth it. They had grown stronger, not only as a couple but as a family. They had learned to treasure every moment together, every smile, every hug. Jason never returned to his old apartment. He stayed home, rebuilding, day by day, everything he had almost destroyed. On New Year's Eve, they celebrated together. The kids, the parents, the grandparents. When the clock struck midnight, Sophie shouted, "Let's make a wish!" "I already have everything I could wish for," Emily said softly, looking around at her loved ones. Jason took her hand gently. "You know," he said, "I thought a lot about my wishes too, and I realized the most important ones have already been granted. You forgave me. You gave me the chance to make things right." Caleb, sitting quietly in a corner of the couch, suddenly spoke up. "I'm glad we're all together again." Sophie climbed into her father's lap. "I always knew you'd come back, Daddy. You just had to believe really, really hard." Margaret discreetly wiped away tears as she watched them. Life didn't stop. It moved forward, bringing new challenges, new joys. But now they would face everything together, as a true family. The story of Emily and Jason became not just a story of forgiveness, but proof that true love can overcome any obstacle, that everyone deserves a second chance if they are truly willing to change from the heart. And when Margaret looked at her family, she understood. Sometimes it's only by losing something precious that we come to recognize its true value. And then perhaps life gives us the chance to win it back on a deeper, truer level of love and understanding.